and we're going. And so I think that common decency and California, wait, I'm not in California. Common decency and Arizona state law require that I say something along the lines of, hello and welcome to The Evolutionary. My name is David Knox. I'm still your host, and I'm super excited to be with one of my favorite people in the world, Tiffany Baker. Tiffany, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Oh man, thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, hasn't it? We've been talking about this for a while.
We have, and I believe that all things happen in the exactly perfect time. So here we are.
Yes, and thank you for that segue because we did not set this up with any intentionality in terms of overlap, but Katie and I are in Sedona, and our very good friend, our mutual very good friend, Nadi passed in February, I think, and
Yeah.
we are here. We were already going to be here, but here we are, and her family's going to come, and we're going to get to say some to see them and spend a little time and spread some ashes and do stuff like that. So this episode is dedicated to her in loving memory of Nadi Hana, 1973 to 1924. What a beautiful soul. And I'll say it again. I've said it many times. I've been calling her Nadi Wan Kenobi because she's more powerful in death.
Yes.
She is just on the
Yes.
other side. I feel her right now.
Yes,
Hmm.
indeed.
All right. Well, uh, yeah, on that note, let's get down to business. Thank you, whoever has joined us and whoever's going to join us. You guys make the show. It's nothing without you. I love you so much. And I'm going to read Tiffany's bio so you know who you're dealing with. All right. Tiffany Baker is a death doula, grief tender, ceremonialist, and transition fairy. She is dedicated to supporting others in reclaiming the fullness of life through facing the portal of death. Her business, Hallowed Harvest End of Life Doula, supports individuals and their families at end of life to have a consciously embodied experience of the final days and beyond. Her and her husband, Bryce Gill, also one of my favorite people and also featured recently on the show, host Cacao Ceremony / Death Salons in person all over the Western United States. Tiffany is passionate in holding grief rituals wherein we all may invite our grief out of the shadows and into the light. Her first book, Life in Technicolor, Embracing Death in Modern Times, is currently being constructed inside of her exquisite mind. And Bryce, her and Bryce's podcast, Hard Joy, will be released this summer, available wherever you get your podcasts.
Yes.
Yes, all of that
Yes,
and so much more.
1000%.
And what I was saying earlier about things like what you were saying earlier about things lining up perfectly. We're doing a show about death a couple of months after our good friend passes, during a time
Mm-hmm.
where we had already planned on being in Sedona. And it just fell this way. We didn't go, oh, we should talk about death because Nadi passed. No. And we lived, and
Right.
Katie and I lived in Sedona with her. It just happened to fall this way as it does. And so many other things have fallen so beautifully into line. But today's topic, you've got a lot on your menu. We could have talked about a lot of things, right?
Oh
and
yeah.
we chose this because it's the one that's really calling to your heart right now, and it was what we wanted to talk about. And so
Yeah.
we're talking about the death doula stuff. Also, we're going to do a little. I wanted to mention that we're going to do things a little bit differently for the Zoom callers this time. Instead of having to watch the live stream on Facebook or YouTube and then, at the appropriate time have the link ready and then jump over to the Zoom call, we're trying some new software, and you're able to just get on the Zoom call and hopefully have a seamless experience. So when the live stream ends, y'all are already on the Zoom call, and we go right into the after party. And it is going to be a party because we are going to do something that is called a death salon, which is similar to a death cafe, only better. And if you don't know what either of those are, hold tight. We're going to get to it.
Stay tuned.
And one more thing, if you are watching on live stream or Facebook and you're thinking, oh, I want to be on the Zoom call, then it is not too late. It's almost too late because we are going to shut it down pretty soon. But it's not too late. You can go to, I think Katie has put a link into the chat on both of those platforms. I will say it out loud. It is theevolutionary.life/guest_invitation, theevolutionary.life// that is guest_invitation. And you can put in your deets there, and within moments you will get the Zoom call and you can pop in. And please come in on mute. Thank you very much. And with that, let's have a show. Let's start with good news and fresh perspectives. Good news and fresh perspectives is where we give intelligent people reason to be optimistic regarding the direction of and or prospects for humanity. And Tiff, I would like you to go first if you have something queued up.
I sure do. So, the good news that I'm bringing to everyone is that it's an election year. Wait, why is that good news? I'll tell you why. It's
Third rail.
because no, it's an election year, which is great news for Death with Dignity. So, for anyone who doesn't know, Death with Dignity is it's actually an organization that helps to propel the passing of bills and laws in individual states that allow medical aid in dying. Currently, there are 10 states and one jurisdiction, being Washington, D.C., that have legalized this. And the first state to have done that is the state I'm in right now, which is Oregon. But more and more states are moving bills past the House and moving it to the Senate. And so this coming year, we have both in Massachusetts and in Illinois, these states are starting to get closer to passing these bills. So if you live in one of those states, keep an eye on your ballots, keep an eye on what is coming up, because the Death with Dignity laws means that for folks who are facing really difficult circumstances at end of life, they have the choice to take control of their future in a way that is dignified and allows them and their families the best possible outcomes at end of life.
That's beautiful and powerful and so important, especially in an era where our healthcare hasn't caught up to a lot of things in terms of our moral development and our technological development, and people are still being kept alive in a state of decay, in a state of this long, slow decline that is torturous. I'm watching it with some of my family right now.
Yeah, and it's not going to be a choice that everyone wants to make, but in the case that it's something that you would want it to be legal in your state. Not only that, but you would want it to be so one of the parts of the law is that you do have to be, basically, you have to pass the same circumstances as for hospice, which means that a doctor, or in some cases, two doctors, certify that you're within 6 months of end of life from your condition. So what that means is that if this is legal in your state, then on your death certificate, it says that you died of your condition. It doesn't say that you died of suicide. And that's really meaningful for a lot of families to honor what actually happened.
Yeah, that's incredibly good news, and I'm looking for that to spread across the nation and hit all the states so that most people have that option. It's beautiful. Okay, so mine isn't directly on topic, but I'll tie it back. Hold tight. We're going to talk about the real Lord of the Flies, and most of this came from one of my favorite books, Humankind by Rutger Bregman. Y'all have heard of Lord of the Flies, the classic novel by William Golding that most of us were forced to read in high school. Oh, wait, I just didn't read it. I mean, most of us were supposed to read it in high school. But The Lord of the Flies was really important literature in our culture because it really defined some aspects of human nature. And it had very incredibly dark commentary on human nature, on what happens when you just leave humans without structure. And if you read the book, or even if you've been alive for 30 or 40 years, you probably know it didn't end well. It was a bunch of boys who got shipwrecked on an island. Things went really, really south, and by the time they found them, 3 of them were dead, and they were hunting one of the protagonists to try to kill him too. And it was just a totally devolved mess. And the thing that I like to say is that it is a work of fiction. It is 100% a work of fiction. Yet it was celebrated as accurately and artistically portraying real human nature. He got a Nobel Prize in literature for this and his other works. And his other works are equally as dark and have an equally dark commentary on human nature. It's phenomenal what we did with this. And the first thing to note is that William Golding was kind of a sociopath. I mean, he was a deeply unhappy man. He was an alcoholic. He beat his children. He was beat himself. And he admittedly identified with the Nazi philosophies. He was not someone that you want to be giving Nobel Prizes to or listening to regarding human nature. But the coup de grace of the veracity of the assessment of human nature that he puts forth in Lord of the Flies came in so he wrote that in 1953, I think, came in June of 1965 when six boys, I think from an English boarding school in Tonga, actually got shipwrecked on an island. What?
Wait,
They
this
stole.
happened after?
Yeah. It happened like 15 years later. And they stole a boat because they were so damn bored and they were teenage boys. Then they literally got shipwrecked on an island and they were there for 15 months. And guess what happened? They ripped each other to shreds and no, they didn't do any of that. They totally took care of each other. It was totally communal. They set up a little commune. They had like the chicken coops and grew vegetables. They had someone made a fire and they tended it constantly night and day for 15 months and never went out. One of them even fell off of a cliff and broke his leg. And the rest of them risked their lives to go down and pull him out. They set his leg with sticks and twine and stuff, and it healed perfectly. And when they got him off the island, they were in peak physical condition, and they were lifelong friends. And so, are you going to believe a literary work that is totally fiction written by a madman, or are you going to believe what actually happened? And my point in telling you all of this is that something that I say all the time, and something that I see all the time, and that is that people are good. The vast majority of everyone is good. And the reason I say this is because one of the things that we're going to talk about is community. And in order to build community or even want to build community, you have to have that faith that people are good. Because otherwise you're asking yourself to go be in league with and trust people that you don't trust are good. And the fact is people are good. People do bad things, but people are coerced to do bad things. People are manipulated to do bad things or scared into violence or whatever. Left to their own devices, people are actually good. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Yes, I totally. So I'm always saying this, that human nature is to pitch in. Human nature is to support one another. Human nature is to help. And I feel like so often when we hear the term human nature, it's when someone is trying to make a point like Golding, right? Golding?
Yeah.
Golding.
Golding, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like that's often when we hear that, it's like, oh, well, that's human nature. And I am always like, no, every person I know only wants to benefit people around them, right? And sometimes it can be limited. Sometimes it's like, oh, it's just for my family, right? But for the most part, people want to help. And I feel like you can see that anywhere. Living in New York City, I was expecting to see a bunch of like harsh, ways of being. It was completely the opposite. People are so helpful there. And so, yeah, I feel like when you're around people, you learn how people are, and they tend to be really sweet and helpful.
Yeah. And that old Chinese proverb that describes, and I won't get into it now, of course, if you go out expecting that everyone is bad and looking for that, then you're going to run into more of that. And so you can just change that belief right now and just go out expecting to find goodness, and guess what you're going to find?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Cool. All right. Let's talk about you, Tiffany.
Oh, let's talk about things.
Let's talk about you. I'd like to shift up and do what we call backing into your vocation. So anyone that's on the show has is taken it upon them to gear their life so that they're doing something to improve humanity or to improve the lives of others, which is one and the same thing, by the way. And And so, if you're in that, then you have an underlying belief that is driving those behaviors. And so I would like you to, before we talk about what you actually do in the death doula work, I would like you to back up and tell us what came first. What is the belief that is driving that, and how did you come by that belief?
Yeah, David, this is such a hard question
I
because I
know.
have so many,
So I
so
gave it
many
to you
beliefs.
early.
Yeah, I know. I have a lot of different beliefs, and they're constantly changing. I was talking to Bryce about
Good.
this today on our walk, and that actually kind of leads me to like what the belief is that I feel like kind of brings us to what I do, which is that I truly believe that within change lies just all kinds of amazing goodness for us. And yet, it is very true that most people experience some level of anxiety or discomfort or apprehension around change. And it can be any kind of change, but obviously, death being the biggest one. And in fact, most people, I'm sure, have heard this before, that there is this belief that almost all fear, or depending on who's saying it, all fear goes back to the fear of death. That this is what drives people to have anxieties, and even if that anxiety seems to be about, where the bins on the street are, that it all kind of goes back to this notion of death, dying, impermanence. um but I feel like around me I see that there is nothing but beauty in change, while there also is sadness, and that there's actually beauty in sadness as well. That it is all of these rich emotions that we get the opportunity to experience, that brings um, liveliness to our lives, right? That brings, I don't know, I this notion of life in Technicolor, right, has come out of what I believe is possible through facing death and dying. And so, yeah, so I really do believe that it is by looking directly at change, and embracing it, and understanding all parts of it, looking at all of it, that we get our best understanding of ourselves and greater connection to the world around us.
That's awesome. Okay, so given that, there's you have parlayed that into an offering that you bring out into the world, the thing that you do, your vocation. So give us the rundown on death doula, because there's some people who probably haven't even heard of a death doula. I hadn't until you told me about it a couple of years ago.
Yes, yeah, it is still largely a burgeoning concept for a lot of folks. So, a death doula, if you haven't heard of a death doula, you may have heard of a birthing doula. It's a similar concept. So, in both cases, whether you're going through the door, coming in the door, or going back through the door, the notion is the same. A doula is someone who provides non-medical, non-physical support for the emotional and spiritual aspects of the momentousness that is coming into or going out of these physical bodies that we're in. And so we do all kinds of things. We support, and each doula is different, but generally speaking, any death doula will be someone who provides support for the individual and for the family to experience the kind of death that they would like. So, in the case that someone is on their deathbed, and they want, let's say they want certain people to be in the room for that particular time, right? Or let's say they don't want, there are things such as advanced directives that can say specifically, I want or don't want these things at end of life. Obviously, when those things are in place, that is good information to have. But having a human there that can advocate with medical teams to be that conduit and communicate, that's something that an end-of-life doula can do. So we're there to support the individual and their loving circle of support in having the very best experience that they can have during a very difficult time.
Cool. And why is that important in our society? What, there's clearly a gap here.
Yeah. So it's really important. So I want, first of all, to, take a moment to give a huge, huge shout out to hospice. Hospice does absolutely incredible work for anyone who has ever had a loss, a death of a loved one, and had experience with hospice. You have had that firsthand experience. But if you haven't, hospice teams are absolutely amazing, and they provide a lot of support medically at end of life. They can offer other kinds of support as well, but often hospice has a lot of different people that they need to see on a daily basis. And so end of life doulas kind of come in to support and fill in the gaps where hospice might be very busy and needing to, they can't spend as much time as they might be able to. So for example, my mom right now is on hospice, and she has a social worker. The social worker comes for 1 hour a month. That's not quite enough, right? That's not quite enough to support. And really, for my mom, she has Alzheimer's, so she doesn't need that kind of talking support. But for like the family and stuff like that, it would be great to have a little bit more time. So that's where an end of life doula can come in and be that person that's that ear and talk about plans. So one of the things that I often find is that folks don't know what their choices are. And I feel like when I know my choices, I am able to feel like I've handcrafted something, right? If I feel like I just have to take what's offered, there I feel less involved. I feel like I haven't been invited to the table. And so end of life doulas help folks know, like, hey, you have these decisions that you could make. You could have a home funeral. You could keep the body of your loved one in the home for up to 3 days, or it's different in every state. That's just an example, right? So what we can do is provide education and information, and then we can also help put those plans in place. So I have history as a project manager, and so I have helped a family to completely plan and execute their memorial service for their loved one. Calling caterers, calling and arranging the florists, all of the things. So yeah, so there's a lot of places where I think individuals and families were feeling um, we had shipped out, we had shipped out a lot of our choices, and the medical community is going to try to keep someone alive. And what that means sometimes is that they're going to do drastic measures, they're going to shock the heart, they're going to do CPR. And sometimes there's no reason to do that. It can be quite violent to do these things to a body. And the family and the individual might want a more peaceful passing when we know that they're dying of natural causes, that their death is here and it's the time for it. So yeah, that's a big part of what we do.
And so it's not just emotional, it's spiritual support. It's tactical, practical stuff as well. And a lot of the things
Sure,
that you
yeah.
mentioned, having seen some of this process with Nadi, having talked to my mom about her experience with grandma, a lot of that stuff, we just react. Like people are hit with the grief of a loss, whether it's sudden or not. And all of a sudden there's all these forms to fill out and choices to make and questions about decisions. And it can be very overwhelming in a time when they're already overwhelmed.
Absolutely. And that's another thing. So, one of the most common questions that I get asked is, when is the right time to call an end of life doula? Is it like at hospice time or some other time? And I always say, right now is the right time. Because more than likely, even for people who are like right on top of it and they have, made a will or they've, filled out an advance directive, there may be things that you could do now that would help with those kind of like in the moment decisions. Someone told me once that if you've made no choices about your final disposition, so whether you want to be buried or you want to be cremated, if you've made none of these decisions, after the person dies, there are over 240 different decisions that need to be made. If you can connect with an end of life doula ahead of time and go ahead and make some of these decisions, it means that your family members will not have to be stressing over, how do I choose during that time.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, having having had the privilege to get to know Nadi's parents a bit, uh, Bill and some of her other close friends, because her parents don't live in the same town that she did. She lived in Sedona. They live in Seattle. It's been a full-time job for Bill to try to get
Yeah.
everything sorted out, and it's ongoing, and it's been 2 months on top of the grief.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's another thing that I like to tell people is, first call an end of life doula, learn, right? What pieces have you prepared for? What have you not prepared for? Start talking about, where your comfort level is. A lot of people have death anxiety. It's totally normal to have death anxiety, but it's also really great to face the anxieties that we experience in the world because so I feel like when I'm afraid of something, it has kind of one cast, right? And the cast is negative. It's scary, it's bad. I want to avoid it, right? But when I can start opening the door to it and I can start inviting it into my world, all of a sudden it has much more quality to it. Right? I start seeing all these nuances and I start understanding different things about it. That's what's available through these conversations. So once you start having these conversations with an end of life doula or whoever, then you can start having these conversations with friends and family. And that is so important. So many people have not talked to their families or to their friends about what they want. And it's really important to have these conversations. I want to plug an idea,
Yeah.
which is called for dinner.
Death for dinner.
Death for dinner. So you can host a death for dinner at your house. And here's what you do. Have a potluck, right? You can make it really simple. Have a potluck. You assign, you bring the salad and you bring the wine. And everyone comes together and then you just have a conversation in small groups about what you want at end of life, right? And what you want in terms of your final disposition, what you want read at your memorial service, and just start having these conversations. It can be, I know it's weird to say, but it can be a really creative experience that can actually get your creative juices flowing, and you can take more of an active role in something that maybe you would think, well, someone else is going to do that, right? And they can, and you don't have to do that, but it's an option. And I definitely recommend that you consider it.
Yeah, that's beautiful. And also, get your juices flowing on what you do need to consider and what if you have assets of any kind, like what do you want done with those? And then, of course, you'll want to get that codified and put into an actual
Yes.
will and notarized and all of that stuff and share it with your family.
Yeah, that's another thing that end of life doulas are we're great connectors. So, not all of us are lawyers or have that training, but we will connect you. We'll find people for you to, solidify the different plans that you need so that you can kind of check all the things off the checklist.
Yeah, that's awesome. That we could talk about this all day long, but we are going to want to jump in a few minutes probably and go do the death salon. So first thing that I want to do is, well, let's wrap up with some housekeeping. And I want you, the first part of that is that I want you to talk about just a minute about the podcast that you're going to do. And I want you to give us a preview of what a death salon is like, even though some people won't be staying on for the after party death salon. I want them to know what they're missing.
Yeah. Okay, great. So I'll speak to that first.
Okay.
So Death Salon is something that was born out of the tradition of Death Cafe. Death Cafe is a social franchise, so it can be held by anyone at any time. If you're interested, just Google Death Cafe and you can find the website where they'll show you. It's just a few brief basic rules about how to hold one. And essentially, it is just an informal conversation about death. And the only rules are for Death Cafe is that you serve tea and cake, and that they have a few other things, but you're supposed to serve tea and cake. It was started in the UK. So we
Makes
call it
sense.
Death Salon. Yeah. And we call it Death Salon because we don't serve tea and cake. We serve cacao
Booyah.
because Bryce is a cacao medicine man,
Yes, he
and
is.
we both bring through cacao for people, which is a beautiful heart opener, and that's why we have combined it with Death Salon. But Death Salon, basically, we drink cacao, we have an informal conversation about death. There's only a few guidelines about how to share, and yeah, and that's pretty much it. We just check in with how death is showing up in our lives at this particular moment.
And I have been to a number of those ceremonies with you, ceremony slash salon, and they are really deep and rich and juicy. And you don't have to have a physical death impending or happening at the time. I mean,
Yeah,
it's about,
exactly.
it can be a metaphorical death in your life as well. It's really about transition, right? And change.
Yes, transition. Yes, it's really, one of the ways that we can start feeling a little more comfortable with death is by recognizing how often it actually is in our lives in a metaphorical way. So it's like, oh, I'm changing jobs. Like the person that I was who did that job before is dying as I step into and birth anew
Hmm.
myself in this job, right? So yeah, it's a really beautiful way to acknowledge the cycles that are constantly going on.
Yeah, very good. Okay, so speaking of
Podcast.
acknowledge, one of the points of flexibility that this new Zoom situation gives us is that we don't have that hard stop, which is why we're still rolling. Just thought I'd
Oh,
let
great.
everyone know this is not a mistake. One more thing I want to cover from you, or hear from you, is about your podcast.
Podcast, yes. Yes. So Bryce and I are currently working on our new podcast, which is called Hard Joy. And in this podcast, we take on, as you might guess, somewhat difficult topics, but we do it with lightness. So it's hard and it's joyful. So, as you might imagine, we will be talking about things like death and stuff like that, but also lots of other topics. So, it's not solely going to be focused on death. But we are super excited. It's been a really fun, creative place to be in together. We really love creating together. And so, yeah, we're super excited to bring it through. And currently, we plan to launch about mid-July. So keep an eye out. Hard Joy Podcast.
Hard joy. We are really excited about that. Thank you, Tiffany. Let me hit a few more housekeeping notes before we jump to the after party. The first thing that I would like to say is that your support is what keeps the evolutionary conversation going and growing. Your time and attention is the most beautiful thing that you can give us. Of course, sharing the evolutionary with your family and friends, please do that. Follow us on YouTube. That's of material value to us to build the channel. So anyone that you can get to follow, fantastic. Thank you so much. It's at youtube.com/ampersand the evolutionary life. And of course, that's on the website and all of that stuff. And then financial support. If it's within your means to do so, and you like what we're doing here, I would love it if you would consider becoming a contributing member of the Evolutionary at the Evolutionary website. And in doing so, you gain access to all of the after party recordings and any other cool exclusive content that we decide to post there. And that is at theevolutionary.life. That's right, .life, because .com is so last season. That's the evolutionary.life. And also there on any page, you can scroll to the bottom. There's a box that says get notified. Guess what? Put in your email address and you get notified of all of this and you get the Zoom links and all that stuff. So also, if you in your daily life come across some good news or fresh perspectives that you think would be worthy of the show, and again, this is not the bake sale to benefit the local chapter of the blah, 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 blah. I want really juicy stuff. I mean, really like world impactful stuff. And not that the bake sale isn't good. Love it. Just go ahead and DM me on Insta at the Evolutionary Life. That would be awesome. I'd also like to say thank you for Stuzy. That's Stu Zimmerman, whose house I am sitting in right now. Thank you, Stu. I needed better bandwidth in the house that I was in with Jaden and Noel, and I love you, Jaden and Noel, but your bandwidth was a little thin. So thank you, Stuzy, for putting me up here and letting me do the show. We are in, by the way, we're broadcasting live from Sedona, Arizona, everyone. Okay, upcoming guests include Jaden Hawkinson, who is a doctor of natural medicine, a acupuncturist, a deep practitioner of the Santo Daime tradition, and he is also here in Sedona at the time. We'll see where he is by the time we interview him. Also, one of my favorite people in the world. And then I think it's time to just go ahead and confirm the rumors that Marilyn G. Wacky is going to be on the call, and she is going to be channeling a being named Zazar. And if you haven't seen her do it, it's a pretty good show. So I'm really excited about that. That's going to be a complete departure from the format of most of our shows. And it's all about change, baby. Let's do this. I'm really excited.
Right. Embrace that change. Let's go.
Hell yeah. Okay, so with that, guys, we are going to hop off of the live stream. Thank you so much for listening and watching and giving us your presence and love on the live stream. And we will see everyone else on the Zoom call. I'm just going to pop out and I'll pop back in. See you later.